Nazarbayev University, a flagship of higher education in Kazakhstan, set to gain a world-class reputation. I'm in the atrium of its main building. Usually a bustling place is unusually quiet today as professors and students remain home. COVID-19 has arguably been the biggest disruption in education since the Second World War. How is the pandemic forcing us to rethink higher education? Mr. Shigeo Katsu, the President of Nazarbayev University, will share his thoughts. Mr. Katsu, COVID-19 has been arguably the most disruptive force after the Second World War in education, interfering with the education of 1 billion students globally. The COVID-19 has probably been the toughest test for agility for higher education providers. What was the response of the Nazarbayev University so far?
Of course, 2020 has been a pretty tough year as institutions like the World Bank have recently pointed out, especially in education, any year, even shorter periods than a year that children lose out from high quality education will indeed affect the future productivity of a whole generation. And the World Bank has even gone as far as sort of trying to estimate what might be potential future losses for an economy such as Kazakhstan, and came up with a pretty daunting number, close to in the neighborhood of $2 billion per year in terms of lower, the results of lower productivity because of setbacks in learning and so on. Now, for universities, already prior to COVID, we have been facing daunting challenges because what we all knew prior to COVID is digital transformation has already started to affect how universities would compete with other organizations that are not necessarily higher education institutions but provide skills, certificate, and so for the digital age. You also have courses such as Coursera, massive online courses, and so that start to obviously become very more serious competitors as well. And so that already started to happen prior to COVID. But with the fact that everybody has been, forced to shift to online mode, for instance, in our case, we basically shifted close to 750 courses, basically overnight. From face-to-face to online. And that has brought about massive challenges for faculty and students. We were, in a way, getting by through the spring semester. We tried to learn our lessons and improve over summer. And this fall, we early on decided that we have to go online, given the risks involved. And probably, I think, in the spring semester, we will also continue with an online mode. And at best, we may have a hybrid, but most likely online. And this, as I said, has brought about massive adjustments that we needed to do. And for us, constantly, we're worrying about the quality of our courses. But also an important part is the engagement between professors and students, and how to make sure that that happens in an online format. So it's not just delivering the same course material video-wise. So professors, faculty has to constantly think about how do I make it palatable, engage students, make it interesting. At a time when students are challenged on their side with less than ideal, to put it euphemistically, studying conditions. They have their siblings to cope with, maybe people in the family are competing for computer time and all of these things. Even the provision of internet qualities and so may not be assured and so on. There are lots of challenges, and this affects all countries, but of course in emerging markets, when sometimes the telecom infrastructure is less developed, it becomes an additional challenge.
Mr. Katsu, well, education is the greatest equalizer, but uneven access to education or to quality education may be the greatest divide. How do you think the pandemic will affect the divide?
Yes, you're absolutely right, and this is what is constantly on our minds. How do we make sure that we support, the socially vulnerable segments, those that, have simply less access and so. So we're experimenting in order to avoid or prevent this divide to come to the fore. So we try to, we're experimenting. We are lending out laptops to students and so that, we try to financially support our students, those who need it, to pay, financially support the internet, broadband access fees and so. We are, considering sending out dongles, the so-called, dongles that access, so that people have better access to broadband and so on. So we constantly have to think about new ways of doing things, yes. And you're absolutely right, the digital divide is something that may have a lasting impact, both at the higher education level, but I'm really concerned more at the primary, secondary school level. Really.
The undergrads here are of the Generation Z, the digital natives, or the most tech-savvy generation in human history.
More savvy than I am.
So do you think they're coping with these changes better than the generation before would have?
In terms of the switch to online, and so, yeah, I think definitely. But coping sort of on the technology front is one thing. But of course, the social interaction still is something that defines, I think that hasn't really changed from our times. Student life is something that you need to experience and do it together, the togetherness and building up bonds. This is probably some of the biggest costs that we see around, and that affects obviously also psychologically many students.
Mr. Katsu, you just mentioned about the instant switch to online teaching and assessment in March. It happened overnight, as you have mentioned, and it did expose some of the strengths and weaknesses of the higher education sector. What has been the Nazarbayev University experience? And going further, how will that affect education generally? Do you think we will start looking at education and approaching education differently? Is it time to rethink education?
Well, yes. The answer would be yes, definitely. But, the pandemic has also forced everyone to become more digitalized. So, in a way, that leap forward we don't want to lose. What we need to do is to make sure that we can increasingly seamlessly marry and combine face-to-face instructions and learning with taking advantage of the technological, digital progress. So that's going to be a lasting big challenge. And overall, already the education system has tried to move away from sort of the teacher telling or, talking to the students, be it in primary education or secondary education, to a much more student-centered learning environment. So where the student becomes really at the center, and increasingly teachers, but all the stakeholders, parents, everybody around, become the support team in some ways and facilitate the learning for the student.
Mr. Katsu, well, some 40 years ago, a university degree that granted a profession oftentimes ensured a lifelong employability. Now the world is changing at a faster pace than it had ever before. It is changing politically, economically, environmentally, and technologically, and socially too. What are some of the skills and behaviors that will help us thrive in this fast changing world?
We call this fast changing world also, we often refer it as VUCA world. I don't know whether you're familiar with this term. VUCA world means ever more volatile, ever more unpredictable, ever more complex, and ever more ambiguous. Boundaries are not clear. So this VUCA world probably history says that we've always been in a VUCA world, but you know, as current contemporaries, we feel that simply the pace of change is accelerating, and you know, the volatility is simply higher. A lot of it because of the uncertainties, geopolitical uncertainties, political uncertainties, as you said, but also technology and its impact. What are then the skills that you need in order to be able to thrive? Your question. You know, if you look at what employers look for increasingly, after all, are not necessarily the hard skills. You know, hard skills, yes, you have to learn them to be able to thrive in a digital environment, so the digitally oriented skills, but those skills, if you don't keep up, meaning constant learning, lifelong learning, they become obsolete too. But the one thing that, and hopefully our graduates, we can send them out with these skills, they need to be able to think. That's the critical thinking side. They need to have empathy aside. And they need to be imaginative, innovative. And these are a lot of these soft skills that are also an integral part of making human beings different from machines. So the empathy part, the critical thinking part, trying to learn constantly and move forward also on the emotional level, all these skills.
Mr. Katsu, you have just rightly mentioned that emotional intelligence, empathy, human creativity, just intrinsically human qualities, they have actually been the ones that have helped us throughout the pandemic as well. These are the qualities that help us to be inventive and to solve complex problems and challenges. But also in the age of digitalization, where most of education is happening online, is remote, and these qualities are often trained through human interaction, collaboration. Where do we find this balance of technological development and online learning, as well as developing emotional intelligence in the students?
That's why the engagement factor is so important, no? I mean, online learning is not just having the classes that you would deliver face-to-face and just deliver it via camera, no. You have to develop, as lecturer or professor, you have to develop actually different skill. How do you make things relevant for the student on the other side of the screen? And it requires new engagement skills. It probably requires more that indeed you have to have your emotional skills and the emotional IQ side, antenna out all the time. You have to try to personalize things. You know, even if it's 20, 30 people or 50 people across, you know, you have to try to engage and make it personal for students. That's equally important. You have to stay open for Q&A sessions and so on. And obviously, we do hope that hopefully we will be able one day to really manage the pandemic so that we can bring our students back. You know? A campus without students is a really sad place.
Does it feel very strange for you to be in this once a bustling place?
Very empty, yes.
Very empty now. During this pandemic, I wonder if the students' career preferences have changed. Have you seen changes in enrollments, in applications, or perhaps research areas? Other universities have reported increased interest among the students in medicine, studying medicine, perhaps virology, epidemiology, the areas that have been overlooked in this part of the world for a decade or so. Are there any new trends spotted here at the Nazarbayev University?
It's a little bit too early to tell. You know, on the research side, we've now developed a whole new research arm on COVID itself. So it's interdisciplinary. We have internal competition for awards, and so research awards. And, you know, our research scientists, faculty, and so their research goes from epidemiological parts to actually trying to work indeed also on antibodies research, and vaccine research as well, but, and all the way through to impact of COVID on society and other things and so on. We've developed traffic light systems that is now increasingly used by government, of creating benchmarks so that we know, okay, green light, does it mean to move to yellow light, red lights, and so on. An epidemiological model was also developed that we shared with government. And we see that actually students are actually quite keen to follow on these things. So yes, probably one of the impacts will be that we will see renewed interest there. I think we will also probably see, actually, interestingly enough, a renewed maybe interest in the social sciences, humanities side, because students also think about not just the practical parts, but this situation forces them to think.
Nearly 65% of the students here at the Nazarbayev University are engaged in STEM-related majors. There's one thing that concerns me about the specialists in the STEM here in Kazakhstan is that we also have the highest outflow of these professionals that are leaving the country, unfortunately, for not having enough opportunities to realize their talents. So how do we marry that, that we provide enough professionals for the market, but then the market can provide enough outlet for their talent? Exactly.
Yes, it's a big challenge. And the last thing that we would like to do, at least here at Nazarbayev University, is really to develop highly qualified professionals in various areas and then see them gone.
Yes, absolutely.
Kazakhstan will always have a challenge in becoming an industrial powerhouse in terms of manufacturing. So it's very difficult to compete with the China to the east or emerging India to the south, or and so on. But Kazakhstan has brains, and brains means we can start to focus on the high value segments of designing, of in products, of engineering products and others. That is where we want to go to, and this requires also a fusion of engineering, computer skills, but also creativity and human empathy skills. So it's very, broad-based. And, that is also why we are so keen to develop around the university our innovation cluster. Hopefully we will, in future, we have secured land across for our what we call ABC, the Astana Business Campus, so that we can not just rely on government money, but hopefully in the future tap private money and other creative ways of financing and attract companies to do their research and development work here, or our own graduates to set up shop there. And so we do it on a small scale at our technopark, and so, but we want to build up. Ultimately, if we succeed in creating an ecosystem where young entrepreneurs are encouraged to establish companies, and so where we are able to bring in established companies to the research development, where we have a vibrant exchange between, professors, scientists, young entrepreneurs, students, as well as business people. And so this is sort of the secret sauce in many cases, what we see elsewhere, be it in the US, the Silicon Valleys of the world, or in Europe or elsewhere. And I think for Kazakhstan to compete, it has to compete on this with the ideas and brains. That's increasingly clear. But it's also therefore important that Kazakhstan stays open. With 18 million people in today's world, Kazakhstan is simply too small to compete. But if we can attract the top talent in Central Asia, in Eurasian continent and elsewhere, establish research and other partnerships through digital means, then we can draw on the brains not of 18 million people, hopefully of 20, 30, 40, 70 and so on. And that is what makes it interesting. And so the more we can create an environment where people say, aha, there's something there in Nur-Sultan city, you know, it's a great place to be. That's what we want to do. Then I think the issue of brain drain and so will start to reverse.
Mr. Katsu, in one of your recent interviews, you have highlighted that you're very proud that the Nazarbayev University is built on two principles. Number one is the absolute merit-based entry to the university, and the second was the academic integrity. Why were these two principles particularly important for Kazakhstan?
Well, it's important because our mandate is to become internationally recognized research university. Now, research integrity has to be there from the very beginning. And it starts with our own foundation program students, but of course all through our undergraduate and graduate programs. So academic integrity is really very, very important. But academic integrity is not just a simple byproduct or product that you can impose. It has to be part of your personal integrity as well. And merit-based is a different lens of it. You know, you want people to be able to compete. You want people to compete on what you would call a level playing field. You don't want people simply because they are coming from wealthier families or so to get the advantage. No, everybody has to compete, and you know, hopefully may the you know, the one with more merit in a way come in and progress. But having said that, it's not competing at all costs, no, obviously. And that's why we put so much emphasis on personal integrity, on you know, values, and so. But you know, we want to make sure that when people, both the graduating students, but also society looks at Nazarbayev University degree, they know that it was earned in a proper manner. You know, somebody has got this Nazarbayev University degree because they earned it, fair and square. And that creates also more value both for the university but also for society.
Mr. Katsu, you spent a decade building this university. You've been at the helm of it from the very beginning. What are you most proud of?
To see what am I most proud of, because everyday challenges are there. I think, you know, thanks to the hard work of faculty, my colleagues, administration, faculty, students in particular, I think after a decade now we can say that Nazarbayev University is on the map. It is recognized as a university, properly functioning and so modern university. And we've been able to collect the top high school graduates of the country. Our faculty is good high quality. And I think the results, the combination of it is actually starting to show. So I'm pretty confident during the course of the next 10 years, our graduates will start to make their mark. And our research output, our innovation output will start to be seen more tangibly also throughout society, including here, but also abroad. So we just laid in some ways over the first 10 years of foundations. We started it's like hop, step, and then jumping. We sort of are between hop and step maybe. And the next decade will tell us how successful we will be.
What are the plans for the next decade?
We will emphasize increasingly, obviously, the graduate side and the research side. We want to be more international in terms of our student body, as I mentioned. By 2025, we even, as a stretch target, said, okay, it would be nice if we could almost have 10% of our student body international and so. And of course, we want to make sure that we are setting our marks as a research university, so we want to start to show up in the rankings at some point. And at the same time see that our innovation cluster starts to take off. The seedlings of Silicon East, maybe. Hopefully type. We want to really contribute and make sure that Nur-Sultan city becomes an educational and research hub, but also through our medical. We really are able to get medical tourism, inward medical tourism going. And so all of these will hopefully contribute to Nur-Sultan city becoming a magnet, regional magnet and beyond. And that's what then creates a positive chain reaction, so that, young people across the world start to say, this is a place to come. That would be my ambition for the next decade.
I've met with some faculty members, also some graduates, but researchers as well. And among them, I've noticed a certain level of fascination about your persona, actually. There is. How would you explain that?
I don't know. You would have to ask them, I guess. Well, but I think many people simply ask, how come that a Japanese is heading this university? I think it starts with that. But I think I simply have to say, it shows how open-minded Mr. Nazarbayev has been. It's his brainchild. He wanted this university to become the flagship research university, and to entrust somebody else, from outside, the task of building it up. And so it takes a lot of guts and conviction on his side. So, I think that probably adds to the questions and the fascination of many people, I guess.
Thank you, Mr. Katsu.
Thank you.